It's lovely to see so many people in the sanctuary on Zoom, and a particular welcome to Christina, who is a trainee vicar who is joining us this morning to learn about what we will do here. We'll postpone the animal sacrifice for the sake of good form, but it's lovely to welcome visitors always. Before we begin, I'm going to invite Paula to introduce what we will be doing this morning.
So Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Well, all I can say is my Ron would have loved this. He would have been delighted that the tradition that he started of an annual remembrance service at NLS is being maintained. And he would have very much appreciated, as I do, this recognition of his commitment to these services. When Ron first proposed a Remembrance Shabbat service, I know that some people feared that this would consist of some sort of glorification of warfare. To the contrary, Ron had studied military history and political history all his life, evidenced by the vast quantity of books in our home on all aspects of war and warfare. His knowledge was encyclopedic, and consequently, his understanding of the implications and effects, geopolitical, economic, logistical, and particularly human, was all-encompassing and sweeping. At heart, Ron was first and foremost an educator. In instigating the remembrance services, his aim was to help bring about a better recognition and understanding of the causes of conflict and of the sacrifices made in the past and still being made by so many people, both in the military and civilian. He wanted to convey something of the relevance and consequences of those sacrifices for our lives today. Ron never failed to underline the horrors of war and was all too aware of the terrible human cost of conflicts. He spent many hours and days thinking about and crafting his services, researching and reading. As time went by and his sight and health deteriorated, it fell on me to help him in putting services together. And in doing so, I was better able to appreciate the depth and scope of his knowledge and understanding and his unswerving commitment to the act of remembrance. Actually, one of the things that was for him very meaningful was, as a member of Blind Veterans, he got the opportunity to march to the cenotaph, and it was a struggle. It was hard for him. It was at a time when he couldn't walk that well. He managed it. It's about 2.5 miles, and he managed it. And he was very proud of the fact that he was able to commit that act of remembrance too. In a moment, we're going to see a very short clip of Ron speaking, recorded by Ray Sylvester as part of his 2019 Desert Island Discs project. In recording the programme with Ron as he did, Ray has provided our family, and indeed the congregation, with a wonderful legacy. But before we see this, and before we start the service, I want to thank Norman Randall for his support. I asked him for support when this was first muted as a tribute to Ron, and he gave that support unhesitatingly. And in fact, he's done much of the work needed to make today's service happen. And I'm very grateful to him, and thank you to the Shul for this tribute to Ron, and thank you all for coming and giving your support today. Now it's over to Ron.
I was involved with Shul in various ways over the years, and as my Hebrew improved, I got together with Ronnie Randall and Lynn Chapman, and we did a joint bar bat mitzvah between us. I also got involved via Jacqueline Hall with school visits, and Jacqueline eventually inveigled me into taking on the whole school visit business, which was a bit of a surprise at first, but which I thoroughly enjoyed as time went on. And I suppose the thing I'm probably proudest of is that I started to take services and then started an annual sequence of doing the Remembrance Day service for the Shul. a process I'm quite proud of. I was very sorry I had to stop when my eyesight went.
And after that, moving introduction to why we're all here, let us turn to page 105, and welcome each other into this space with Ma Tovu. Ma Tovu, Ma Tovu, Ma Tovu Olecha Yaakov, Mishknotecha Yisrael, Mishknotecha Yisrael, V'ani berov chastecha, Ahavo ve'techa, Eshtachave el heichal kodechecha, Ve'yiratecha el heichal kodechecha, Ve'yiratecha. Adonai ahavti me'on beitecha, Umekom mishkan kavodecha, Va'ani eshtachave ve'echra'a evracha lifnei Adonai osi. Va'ani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon Elohim berov chastecha aneni be'emet yishecha. May our prayer be acceptable to you, eternal God. In your great kindness, answer us with your saving truth. Please be seated. And I'm delighted to invite Arnold to give the first of our Remembrance Service readings.
Shabbat Shalom. This is a poem by Robert Lawrence Binion, written in 1914 and called For the Fallen. With proud thanksgiving, a mother for her children, England mourns for her dead across the sea. Flesh of her flesh they were, spirit of her spirit, fallen in the cause of the free. Solemn the drums thrill, death august and royal sings sorrow up into immortal spheres. There is music in the midst of desolation and a glory that shines upon our tears. They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. They mingle not with their laughing comrades again. They sit no more at familiar tables at home. They have no lot in our labour of the daytime. They sleep beyond England's foam. But where our desires are, and our hopes profound, felt as a wellspring that is hidden from sight, to the innermost heart of their own land they are known, as the stars are known to the night. As the stars that shall be bright when we are dust, moving in marches upon the heavenly plain, as the stars that are starry in the time of our darkness, to the end, they remain.
Thank you. We continue on page 106. Let's read together. Eternal God, school us in your teachings and make us loyal to your commandments. May we never consent to evil or surrender to temptation or self-contempt. Help us to rise above selfishness and make us responsive to the voice of conscience. Direct our every impulse to your service. Today and every day, may we merit kindness and compassion in the sight of all who behold us, and let us know your love. We praise you, O God, for the love you daily show to us. Shachar Rabakeshcha, Suriyo Miskabi, Eroch Lefanecha Shachri V'Gamarbi, Lifnei Gedolata, Emod V'Ebahel, Ki Eincha Tireh L'Machshavot Libi, Mazeh Asher Yuchal, Halet B'Halashon, Lasoto Makoach, Ruchi B'toch Kirbi, Hinei Lecha Titav Zimra Tenoch, Al Ken Odach Be'od Tichya Nishmat Eloabi. Baruch Sha'ama B'Haya Ha'olam, Baruch Hu. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Ha'olam, Hamuhulal B'fi Amo Mushubach Umfo'a Bilshon Chasidav Abadav. Bishvachot u'vismirot Nagadelcha v'namlichecha Malkeinu Yachid Chei Ha'olamim. Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Muhulal Batishbachot. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yihalelucha Sela. Ashrei Ha'am Shekachalo. Ashrei Ha'am She'Adonai Elohav. And Kathy and Harvey are now going to give us two further readings on the theme of poppies and remembrance.
Thank you. During our Remembrance Shabbat, you will hear 4 readings about the poppy interspersed throughout the service. The information is adapted from the Royal British Legion's website. And as a personal note, in my previous career as a chartered accountant, I used to audit the Royal British Legion and visit the poppy factory every year in preparation for poppy making and Remembrance Day. And it was always a very moving and powerful experience. Why poppies? There's no law to say you must wear a poppy at this time of the year. Wearing a poppy is still a very personal choice, reflecting individual experiences and personal memories. It's never compulsory, but it is greatly appreciated by those who it is intended to support. In recent years, though, poppy wearing has been seen by some to be a glorification of war. As Paula said before, nothing could be further from the truth. As a simple and well-established symbol, it really is a national institution, one that carries a wealth of history and meaning with it, though what it symbolizes is not as fanciful as some of the meanings often attached to it. A lot of people know how poppy wearing all started at this time of the year. During World War I, much of the fighting took place in Western Europe. The countryside was blasted, bombed, and fought over repeatedly. Previously beautiful landscapes turned to mud, bleak and barren scenes where little or nothing could grow. There was a notable and striking exception to the bleakness: the bright red Flanders poppies. These resilient flowers flourished in the middle of so much chaos and destruction, growing in the thousands upon thousands.
In the spring of 1915, shortly after losing a friend in the Battle of Ypres, a Canadian doctor, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, was moved by the sight of the poppies, and that inspiration led him to write the now famous poem In Flanders Fields, which we read at our 2018 civic service, held to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the First World War armistice. The poem then inspired the adoption of the poppy in memory of those who had fallen in the war as an official symbol of remembrance across the United States, in Canada, Australia, and in the UK. Involved with those efforts was a French woman, Anna Guérin, who was in the UK in 1921, where she planned to sell the poppies in London. There she met Earl Haig, who founded the veterans charity, the Royal British Legion, and he was persuaded to adopt the poppy as the Legion's emblem. The Royal British Legion, which had been formed in 1921, ordered 9 million poppies, and they went on sale on 11th of November that year. The poppies caught the public's imagination and sold out almost immediately. The first poppy appeal raised over £106,000 to help veterans with housing and jobs, a considerable sum at the time, equivalent to over £9.5 million in today's money. This runaway success led to the establishment of the Poppy Factory, employing disabled ex-servicemen who today produce millions of poppies each year. The demand for poppies in England continued unabated and was so high, in fact, that few poppies actually managed to reach Scotland. To address this and meet growing demand, Earl Haig's wife Dorothy established the Lady Haig Poppy Factory in Edinburgh in 1926 to produce poppies exclusively for Scotland. Today, over 5 million Scottish poppies, which have 4 petals and no leaf, unlike the poppies in the rest of the UK, they are still made by hand each year by disabled ex-servicemen at Lady Haig's Poppy Factory.
Thank you. We continue on page 108. תהילה לדוד, ארוממך אלוהי המלך, ועברך שמך לעולם ועד. בכל ימיו ברכך, והללה שמך לעולם ועד. גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד, ולגדולתו אין חקר. דור לדור ישבח מעשיך, וגבורתך יגידו. הדר כבוד הודיך, ודברי לבנותיך עשיך. ועזוז נורתך יאמרו, וגדולתך אספרנה. זכר רב טובך יביעו, וצדקתך ירננו. חנון ורחום אדוני, ערך אפיים וגדול חסד. טוב אדוני לכל, ורחמיו על כל מעשיו. יודוך אדוני כל מעשיך, וחסידיך יברכוך. כבוד מלכותך יאמרו, וגבורתך ידברו. להודיע לבני האדם גבורתיו, וכבוד הדר מלכותו. מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים, וזוקף לכל הכפופים. עיני כל אליך ישברו, ואתה נותן להם את אוכלם בעיתו. פותח את ידיך, ומשביע לכל רצון. צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו, וחסיד בכל מעשיו. קרוב אדוני לכל קורב, לכל אשר יקראוהו באמת. רצון יראיו יעשה, ואת שבתם ישמע ויושיעם. תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו, ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד. ואנחנו נברך יד, מעתה ועד עולם. Hallelujah. And before we all rise, Max and Maggie are going to share with us further background to the poppy.
In today's Poppy Appeal, 40,000 volunteers distribute 40 million poppies. Remembrance in the UK today is very different than it was 100 years ago. People take part whatever their political or religious beliefs. The poppy remains a humble, poignant symbol of remembrance and hope. Wearing a poppy is a show of support for the service and sacrifice of our armed forces, veterans, and their families. It represents all those who lost their lives on active service in all conflicts, from the beginning of the First World War right up to the present day. It also honors the contribution of civilian and uniformed services, which contribute to national peace and security, and acknowledges innocent civilians who have lost their lives in conflict and acts of terrorism. The poppy we wear is red because that's the natural color of the poppy flower, and like the natural flower, The original version of the poppy did not feature a leaf. A leaf was first introduced in the 1960s, as it was the practice to make poppy sprays, an alternative to a poppy wreath, which were made up of 5 silk poppies attached to 7 pieces of green fern. Leaves slowly became an optional extra, and by 1984, demand for them had grown to 12 million a year. Although they were still issued separately to the poppy, in 1995, poppies with leaves included were made available for the first time.
Let's conclude our learning about the poppy and its story. The money raised during the annual Poppy Appeal helps the Royal British Legion to support the Armed Forces community in lots of different ways. The RBL is the country's largest armed forces charity with 180,000 members, 110,000 volunteers, and a network of partners and charities, providing lifelong support wherever and whenever it's needed to serving and ex-serving personnel and their families. From providing expert advice and guidance to recovery and rehabilitation, through to transitioning to civilian life, the RBL is at the veterans' side and the side of their families too, every step of the way. The RBL works with politicians and officials at all levels to represent the interests of the armed forces community, challenging myths about serving and ex-serving personnel, and to outline key actions it believes the government should take to improve the health, finances, and well-being of the armed forces, veterans and their families. In this way, the RBL gives our armed forces community a voice, championing the interests of serving and ex-serving personnel, and campaigning on key issues to help improve their lives and make their voices heard. So no, the poppy is not a symbol of the glorification of war, but it is a visible act of remembrance and hope for a better future. And is also a small element of a well-regarded and effective charitable organization. If you choose to wear a poppy, remember these things and wear it with pride.
Thank you both. We rise now on page 111 for Yishtabach. Yishtabach Shimcha La'ad Malkeinu, Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol VeHaKadosh, B'Shamayim u'Ba'aretz, Ki Lecha Na'eh Adonai Eloheinu, Ve'Elohei Avotenu Ve'imotenu, Shirush Bacha, Halel Bezimra, Barachot Vahodaot, L'Shimcha Me'ata V'Adon Laham, Baruch Ata Adonai, Havocher B'Shirei Zimra. I'm turning to page 135. Baruch Hu Et Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Leolam Va'ed. Praise be the one to whom our praise is due. We praise the Eternal One to whom our praise is due forever. Please be seated. We praise you, Eternal One, our God, Sovereign of the universe, Maker of light and creator of darkness, Author of peace and creator of all things. In your mercy, you give light to the earth and all who live on it. And in your goodness, you renew creation continually, day by day. How manifold are your works, O God. With wisdom have you made them all. The world is full of your creations. Your handiwork proclaims your praise. The radiant stars bear witness to your glory. We praise you, O God, creator of light. Ahava rabba ahavtanu Adonai Eloheinu. Chemla godola v'terach hamalta aleinu. Avinu malkeinu ba'avor avotenu shebabchu v'cha. Vatlamdem chukei chayim ken tuchonenu utlamdenu. V'tein belebenu lahavin ulahaskil lishmoa lilmod ulalamed. Lishmor v'la'asot ulakayem et kol divrei toratecha be'ahava. והארננו בתורתך, ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך, ויחד לבבנו לאהבה וליראה את שמך. כי בנו בחרת לייחדך באהבה, ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. As we come to Shema, please stand or sit according to your custom. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Leolam va'ed. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, v'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha, v'hayu hadavarim ha'eleh, asher anochi metzavacha hayom al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam, v'shiftecha b'veitecha, uv'lechtecha b'derech, uv'shochbecha uv'kumecha, וגשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו, ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם. Please be seated. Good and beautiful and true, sound, established and enduring are these words now and forever. True it is, Eternal One, that you are our God, sovereign God and Redeemer, as you were the God and Redeemer of our ancestors. You are our Maker, the rock of our salvation. We have known you always as our helper and our liberator. There is no God but you. Truly, you are first and you are last. We have no Redeemer but you. You redeemed us from Egypt and freed us from the house of bondage. Then with great joy, Moses, Miriam, and all Israel together sang to you this song. Mi chamocha b'yelim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot, osef ele, osef ele. Shira chadasha shipchu ge'ulim, לשמחה על שפת הים, יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. צור ישראל, קומה בעזרת ישראל, גואלנו אדוני, צבאות שמו, קדוש ישראל. Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael, Ga'al Yisrael, Yisrael. Please rise on page 140, the Amidah. Adonai sepatai tivtach ufia gitehilatecha. Adonai sepatai tivtach ufia gitehilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, קונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לפני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך חוזר ומשיח ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם, מזריח השמש ומוריד הטל. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים. סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה. ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי המתים. We sanctify your name on earth, as in the prophet's vision, the hosts of heaven sing your praise above, for so it is written, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Meloch ol haaretz kavodo. Kavodo male olam. Baruch kavod Adonai bimkomo. Mimkomcha malkeinu tofia v'timloch aleinu, ki mechakim anachnu lach. Yimloch Adonai leolam, Elohai Yiksion, L'dor v'dor. Hallelujah. From generation to generation, we will make known your greatness. To the end of time, we will proclaim your holiness. Your praise, O our God, shall never depart from our lips. We praise you, Eternal One, the Holy God. Please be seated. And we continue on page 143 with Yismachu. Yismachu v'malechotecha, shomre, 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 Shabbat v'koreh, oneg Shabbat. Yismachu v'malechotecha, shomre, 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 Shabbat v'koreh, oneg Shabbat. Mekadasheh, Mekadasheh Shavi'i Shabbat, Kulam Yisba'u, V'yitagu metu v'cha Shabbat, Shabbat, Yismachu v'malechotecha, Shomre, 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 Shabbat v'koreh, oneg Shabbat. Yismachu v'malechotecha, Shomre, 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 Shabbat v'koreh, oneg Shabbat. V'hashvi'i ratzita bo v'kidashto Shabbat, chemdat yamim, oto karata Shabbat, Shabbat. Yismachu v'malechotecha, Shomre, 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 Shabbat v'koreh, oneg Shabbat. Yismachu v'malechotecha, Shomre, 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 Shabbat v'koreh, oneg Shabbat. Zecher l'maaseh, l'maaseh v'reshit Shabbat. Zecher l'maaseh, l'maaseh v'reshit Shabbat, Shabbat. Yismachu v'malechotecha, Shomre, 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 Shabbat v'koreh, oneg Shabbat. Yismachu v'malechotecha, Shomre, 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 Shabbat Bekore, Oneg Shabbat. Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Ritzei b'mnuchatenu, Kadshenu b'mitzvotecha, V'tein chalkenu b'toratecha, Sab'enu mituvecha, V'samchenu b'shuatecha, V'taher libenu le'optecha be'emet, V'hanchilenu Adonai Eloheinu be'ahava uv'ratzon Shabbat kodshecha, Ve'anuchu va Yisrael mekadshe shemecha, Baruch ata Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Eternal God, be gracious to your people Israel, and in your love accept their prayers. May our worship now and always be acceptable in your sight. We praise you, O God, whom alone we worship in reverence. Modim anachnu lach, she'ata hu Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu le'olam va'ed. Sur chayenu magenishenu, ata hu lador vador. Nodeh lecha unesaper tehilatecha, al chayenu hamasurim biyadecha, ve'al nishmotenu hapagudot lach, ve'al nisecha shebechol yom imanu, ve'al niflotecha v'tovotecha shebechol eit erev v'avoke v'tzoharayin. Baruch ata Adonai, hatov shimcha, u'lecha na'eh lehodot. Grant peace, welfare, and blessing, grace, love, and mercy to us and to all Israel, your people. As a loving parent, bless us with the light of your presence. For by the light of your presence, eternal God, you have revealed to us the law of life, a love of kindness and righteousness, blessing and mercy, life and peace. For it is good in your sight that your people Israel and all peoples be blessed at all times with your gift of peace. We praise you, O God, the source of peace.
I'm going to read a poem by Hannah Senesh, but a little bit about her first. She was a poet and a playwright, both writing in both Hungarian and Hebrew. She was born in Hungary and emigrated to Israel in 1939. In 1941, she joined the paramilitary group Haganah, and in 1943, she was recruited by the Special Operations Unit of the British Women's Auxiliary Air Force and sent to Egypt for parachute training. In 1944, she parachuted behind enemy lines to Yugoslavia to help Allied forces and Jews in occupied Europe. While attempting to cross the border with a group of partisans, she was arrested while carrying her British military transmitter. Despite being repeatedly interrogated and tortured, she refused to give over the transmitter code. She was tried for treason and executed in November 1944. And it wasn't until 1993, after the Cold War, that she was exonerated. This poem, short though it is, was written in Yugoslavia in 1944. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the secret fastness of the heart. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame.
We'll now take a few moments for silent prayer and reflection. Yehayola ratson, imrefi, bahek yon libi, lefanecha, Adonai tsori, Adonai tsori, Bagawali, Ose shalom, shalom bimromav, Uyase shalom aleinu, Ve'al kol Yisrael, Ve'al kol bnei Adam, Uyase shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, Amen. Ose shalom, shalom bimromav, Uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Amen. We turn now to our Torah service, which will begin on page 490. Page 490. Assemble the people, men, women, and children, and the strangers in your cities, to hear and learn to revere the Eternal One, your God, and observe faithfully all the precepts of this Torah, and let their children who do not yet know it hear, that they too may learn to revere the Eternal One, your God. And as we rise to open the ark, we will sing V'ha'erinenu, open our eyes to your teaching. V'ha'erinenu b'toratecha, v'da'abek libeinu b'mitzvotecha, v'yached levavenu le'ahava ol yira et shemecha, v'ha'erinenu b'toratecha, v'da'abek libeinu b'mitzvotecha, v'yached levavenu le'ahava ol yira et shemecha. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo. Gadlul Adonai iti, Unaroma Shemo Yachdav. Lecha Adonai Hagadula, V'hatiferet, V'hatiferet, V'hanetzach, V'hahor. Yehovah b'shamayim v'ha'aretz, lecha Adonai hamamlacha, v'hamit na'aseh lecho lerosh. Please be seated. This morning we will be reading from Parashat Vayetze, Genesis chapter 29, which you will find if you have one of these on page 197. And feel free to go and grab one if you don't. And this is the story of Jacob fleeing from his immediate family and bumping into his uncle and his cousin, his uncle Lavan and his cousin Rachel. And something rather interesting happens when he meets the family. He first of all meets Rachel, and the Torah tells us, Vayaged Yaakov, and Jacob told her who he was, what was happening with his family, gave her all the news. And then she took him home excitedly to meet her dad, his uncle. And then we see Vayasaper Yaakov, and Jacob told his uncle all the news. But they're two different words, Vayaged and Vayasaper. Vayaged comes from the same root as Haggadah, like a story that's passed on. And Vayasaper comes from the same root as Sefer, a book. So what's the difference between the two words, the rabbis asked? The Malbim, who is a 19th century Torah commentator from Central Europe, suggests that it was about the level of care that the listener had. Vayaged, he said, Haggadah is where what you're talking about is touching the recipient. And Rachel really deeply cared about hearing stories of her family and what was going on and what had been happening in faraway lands, in faraway places. But Lavan didn't really care. He had no affection for his family at all. I kind of imagine him sort of like, yeah, birthright, yeah, animal skins, yeah, not paying attention to what was going on. And that was more like a sefer, like a book, a distant experience that's conveyed by the written word without any emotional component. And I think this tells us two really important things. The first one is that the way the listener behaves can affect the way that the person telling the story can manage to tell the story. Because those are both Jacob's verbs. Jacob was the one doing the thing, and he was doing it differently depending on the behavior of the listener. But the second point is really about our theme today of remembrance. And that's about the idea that it is possible to be touched by events that didn't directly concern us, and it's possible not to be touched by events that didn't directly concern us. And how we can try and be Rachel rather than Lavan, how we can try and listen in a way that we are emotionally invested in the stories and the memories that we're hearing, rather than as some sort of distant historical artifact being recounted to us. That is what makes remembrance rather than history. And that's what we're striving to do this morning. So I'm going to invite Max to bring forward the scroll, if I clear some of my clutter out of the way. Thank you. Thank you. Check we're still in the right place, which we are, and I'm then going to call up Ayari to do our Torah blessings. Ta'amod, Levia, Bat Me'ir, L'Kriyat HaTorah.
Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai Haborach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, Asher Bahar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, V'natan Lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Vayisa Yaakov Raglav, Vayelech Artsa B'nei Kedem, Vayar, V'hine Ber Basadeh, V'hine Sham, Shlosha Adretzon Rovtzim Aleha, Ki min haBe'er Hahi, Yashku Ha'adarim, V'ha'even Gedolah al pi haBe'er. We can have a Torah camera as well, actually. To see it a bit clearer now. V'ne'esfu shama kol ha'adarim, v'galalu et ha'even me'al pi haBe'er, v'hishku et hatzon, v'heshivu et ha'even al pi haBe'er limkoma. Vayomer lahem Yaakov, achai me'ayin atem, vayomeru mecharan anachnu. Vayomer lahem hayadatem et Lavan ben Nachor, vayomru yadanu, vayomru lahem hashalom lo, vayomru shalom v'hineh, vayomru hashalom. V'hineh Rachel bito ba'a im hatzon. Vayomer en od hayom gadol lo et he'asef hamikneh. Hashku hatzon u'lechu re'uhu. Vayomru lo nuchal ad asher ye'asfu kol ha'adarim. וגללו את האבן מעל פי הבאר, והשכינו הצאן. עודנו מדבר עמם, ורחל באה עם הצאן אשר לאביה, כי רואה היא. ויהי כאשר ראה יעקב את רחל בת לבן אחי אמו, ואת צאן לבן אחי אמו, ויגש יעקב ויגל את האבן מעל פי הבאר, וישק את צאן לבן אחי אמו. וישק יעקב לרחל, וישא את קולו ויבך, ויגד יעקב לרחל, כי היא אחי אביה הוא, וכי בן רבקה הוא, ותרוץ ותגד לאביה. ויהי כשמוע לבן את שמה יעקב בן אחותו, וירוץ לקראתו, ויחבק לו, וינשק לו, ויביאהו אל ביתו, ויספר ללבן את כל הדברים האלה.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. You may be seated. Just before we lift the scroll, take your mask, Irene. Let us learn what we were in fact reading. Jacob moved on and headed for the land of the people of Kedem. He looked, and lo, a well in the field with 3 flocks of sheep lying at rest by it, because this was the well from which they watered the flocks. A good-sized rock lay on the mouth of the well. When all the flocks were gathered there, they, the shepherds, would roll the stone off the well's mouth and water the flocks. Then they would put the stone back in place over the well's mouth. Jacob said to them, "My friends, where are you from?" "We are from Haran," they said. He said to them, "Do you know Lavan, son of Nahor?" And they said, "We do know him." "Is he well?" he said to them. "He is well," said they, "and there is his daughter Rachel coming along with the flock." He said, "Since the day is still young and not yet the time for rounding up the livestock, why don't you water the flock and then take them out to pasture?" But they said, "We can't do that until all the flocks are rounded up and they, the shepherds, roll the stone off the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel arrived with her father's sheep. She was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Lavan, his mother's brother, with his uncle Laban's flock, Jacob went over, rolled the stone off the well's mouth, and watered his uncle Lavan's flock. Now Jacob kissed Rachel and began to cry in a loud voice. Jacob then told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Upon hearing the news of his sister's son, Jacob, Lavan ran to greet him, hugging and kissing him. He brought him into his house. Then Jacob told, with a different verb, Lavan everything that had happened. To be continued. So I'm now going to invite Max. Are you lifting the scroll? You can do it. Please rise. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtakavu lehar kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Put it back down here first if it's easier. Sorry. Please be seated. I'm now delighted to invite Norman to read our Haftarah. We say, Ya'amod, Nahum ben Shalom lekro et ha-Haftarah.
Thank you, Gabriel. Shabbat Shalom. For our Haftarah reading in our Remembrance Service this Shabbat, the Liberal Judaism lectionary gave me three choices, and I've chosen the least obvious of the three, which is an extract from the book of Proverbs, part of the Ketuvim or writing section of our scripture. I shall be reading from chapter 22, verses 1 to 12. Though often referred to as the Proverbs of Solomon, these wisdom sayings come from a wide variety of periods, all after Solomon's time. Whatever the origins of these sometimes gnomic aphorisms, they echo the wisdom literature to be found in other Middle Eastern cultures of the 10th to the 6th centuries BCE. I hope you'll be struck, as I am, by how much one can relate these ancient maxims to our modern world. They've stood the test of time because they deal principally with human behavior. It turns out we're not so different from the folk of bygone ages. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bacha b'neviim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemorim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habohei b'torah u'shmoshe avdo u'Yisrael amo u'v'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek. Repute is preferable to great wealth. Grace is better than silver and gold. Rich man and poor man meet. The Lord made them both. The shrewd man saw trouble and took cover. The simple kept going and paid the penalty. The effect of humility is fear of the Lord, wealth, honor, and life. Thorns and snares are in the path of the crooked. He who values his life will keep far from them. Train a lad in the way he ought to go. He will not swerve from it, even in old age. The rich rule the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. He who sows injustice shall reap misfortune. His rod of wrath shall fail. The generous man is blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. Expel the scoffer, and contention departs. Quarrel and contumely cease. A pure-hearted friend, his speech is gracious. He has the king for his companion. The eyes of the Lord watch the wise man. He subverts the word of the treacherous. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol ha'olamim tzadik b'chol hadorot ha'el ha'neman ha'omer v'yaseh ha'madaber u'makayem shekol devarav emet v'tzedek al ha'torah v'al ha'avodah v'al ha'neviim v'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu lidusha v'limnucha lekavod u'letifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'mevorachim otach yitbarach shemecha b'fi kol echai tamid li'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh HaShabbat.
Amen. Shkoach. Please rise on page 493 for our concluding, our community blessings. Right there. Eternal God, whose dominion embraces the universe, we ask your blessing for our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, and all the royal family, for those who govern our country, and all who influence the quality of its national life. Make them conscious of their responsibility and teach them to exercise it in accordance with your will. May we all help to fashion in this country a society that excels in freedom and justice, tolerance and compassion, so that it may be a force for righteousness and peace in the life of humanity. May the one who blessed our ancestors bless all our brothers and sisters of the house of Israel, who enter synagogues to pray and to give aid to those in need. May the Holy One, to whom all praise is due, hear their prayers and help them to fulfill their aspirations for good. Eternal God, our rock and redeemer, grant blessing to the state of Israel, created to fulfill an age-old dream and to be a haven for the oppressed. Inspire its leaders and citizens with faithfulness to the aims of its founders, to develop the land for the benefit of all its inhabitants, and to implement the prophetic ideals of liberty and justice. May they live in harmony with one another and in peace with their neighbors, and cause to come true once more the ancient vision that out of Zion shall go forth Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. As Peter comes into place to read another reading, Norman, could I ask you to mute yourself because we're getting some feedback? I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. This is an extract from the booklet prepared for the service of Thanksgiving, consequent on the cessation of hostilities that the then Chief Rabbi, Joseph Hertz, sent out to the UK's Jewish communities to be used on Shabbat, the 16th of November, 1918, which corresponded to the year 5679. Father of mercy, cheer with gladsome tidings the hearts of those who long for their absent kinfolk. Send healing to the wounded and thy heavenly comfort to all who weep for the loss of those dear unto them. Make us glad according to the days wherein thou hast afflicted us, according to the years wherein we have seen evil. O make thou wars to cease unto the end of the earth, and hasten the days when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Implant thou a new heart and a faithful spirit in the peoples, so that envy and hatred perish from among the children of men. And may they speedily form one league of brotherhood, bringing justice and righteousness, and proclaiming liberty and peace unto all the dwellers on earth. Amen and amen.
Thank you. We continue on page 494 as I take the scroll ready for the ark to be opened. Yahallelu et Shem Adonai, ki nisgav shemo levado. Odo aleres b'shamayim, v'yaret keren le'amo, tehila l'kol vasita lifnei Yisrael, ad kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. And on page 496. Kizot habrit asher ochrit et Beit Yisrael acharei hayamim hahem ne'um Adonai. I will put my teaching within them and engrave it on their hearts. I will be their God and they shall be my people. No longer shall anyone need to teach a friend or a neighbor to know me, for they shall all know me, young and old alike. Ahashivenu Adonai. Kadesh Yameinu Kakadem, Kadesh Yameinu Kakadem. Please please be seated. I'm delighted now to invite David Lippman forward, who is going to read a drosh to explain what we're doing here today, and in particular to honour the memory of Ron.
Whilst the theme of this Remembrance Service talk takes as its inspiration the concept of doing one's duty in recognition of past and present veterans of our armed forces, our gathering has a special poignancy. We remember today not only those who served in the First and Second World Wars and subsequent conflicts, but the person who instituted and organized our annual acts of remembrance for many years, Ron Scott. Ron passed away 6 months ago. He was himself an Army veteran. He served in the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, REME, from 1950 to 1965. He was a man of compassion and integrity. He had a deep and abiding interest in history in general and in military history in particular. For Ron, the Remembrance Service and the thought and work that he put into devising it each year was itself an act of duty. His sense of obligation to recognize and remember, and to help others to recognize and remember the lives that have been lost in conflicts around the world. In his services, Ron would include readings and poems, often moving, always relevant, together with sermons to help us understand something that was and remains very foreign to most of us, the effects of conflict on those involved. His sermons were always thought-provoking and relevant to whatever was going on in the world at the time. What follows draws heavily from Ron's service of November 2008, when the theme of his drosha was duty. In it, he recounted the involvement and acts of bravery of his various relatives who had served during the Second World War. The points he made in that sermon, focusing on the obligation to do one's duty, are as relevant today as they were 13 years ago. These are his words. Duty is a word that we don't hear much about anymore, except maybe in the legal duty of care context and in excise duty. Chambers' dictionary defines it, something one is or feels obliged to do, a moral or legal responsibility or the awareness of it. Ron, his father and uncles, along with many members of this congregation, parents, grandparents, and other relatives, were around at a time when people had clear ideas, clear ideals about how the world, how society should be. He made the point that people who have such ideals feel a strong sense of responsibility, almost a duty, to help change society for the common good, though Ron was canny enough to recognize that the common good was a phrase open to interpretation, depending on one's political viewpoint. Let's listen to Ron's words again, remembering that these words were spoken from this bimah in November 2008, only 13 years ago. In January 1961, President Kennedy could say, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but rather what you can do for your country." And he was heard around the world with admiration. In 1968, this idealism showed itself on the streets of Paris and on the campuses of universities all over the world. Then came Margaret Thatcher in October 1987 with her contentious opinion that there is no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families, and no government can do anything except through people, and people must look to themselves first. By this time, the political apathy, even hostility to politics, and the focus on getting a well-paid job after university was marked. The political apathy of people today is leading many to worry about the future of democracy in this country. Remember, 2008. In a world of individuals pursuing their own goals and looking for self-realization, duty gets in the way. When there is no such thing as society, then there is no obligation or moral responsibility to it. So duty becomes an outmoded concept. Yet idealism didn't go away for those decades since 1987. It just became devalued in the wider society. People still entered public service occupations and still did their duty, but they became less visible. Ron was at pains to point out that here in this sanctuary, there were and still are people who do take duty seriously and have always taken duty seriously and even shape their lives round duties of one sort or another. He reminded us that this is what makes a community and a congregation. He reflected on the two meanings of mitzvah, duty, obligation, and that as a result, our lives as Jews are bound up with a sense of duty and of moral obligation, evidenced as it now is at LNS with its involvement in a wide range of local and active self-help and charitable organizations. Our shul's work in local communal initiatives, in social action, in the wonderful projects that our bar and bat mitzvah students and Kabbalat Torah young men and women raise funds for. The many tasks and projects that knit a congregation together and sustain it for the future, led by volunteers, is a testament to an idealism that still exists in young and older people alike, and with it a sense of duty towards the collective rather than the individual good. And so, as we gather to remember those men and women of our armed forces who did their duty then and have done their duty still, we remember Ron and his immense contribution each year to the life of our community. And we remember too Paula, who is with us this morning. May his, Ron's, and all their memories be for a blessing.
We rise now for our concluding prayers on page 520. Aleinu l'shabeach la'adon hakol, la'tet gdola liotze bereshit, asher samchalkenu le'ached et shemo, v'gor aleinu l'hamlich malchuto, va'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגופי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, מעל הארץ, מתחת אין עוד. על כן נקווה לך, אדוני אלוהינו, לראות מהרה בתפארת עוזך, להעביר גלולים מן הארץ והאלילים קרות יכרתון, לתקן עולם במלכות שדי, וכל בני בשר יקראו בשמך, להפנות אליך כל רשעי הארץ. יכירו וידעו כל יושבי תבל, כי לך תכרע כל ברך תשבע כל לשון, לפניך אדוני אלוהינו, יקראו ויפולו ולכבוד שמך יקר יתנו, ויקבלו כולם את עול מלכותך, ותמלוך עליהם מהרה לעולם ועד. כי המלכות שלך היא, ולעולמי עד תמלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. Creator of the universe, you give us life in which joys and sorrows are commingled in accordance with your wisdom, and you send death with its promise of eternal peace. Teach us to accept humbly and courageously whatever burden is laid upon us. Comfort those who mourn, and let the light of faith illumine the darkness of their sorrow with the hope of immortality. Strengthen us at all times with an unfailing trust in your providence. This Shabbat, we think particularly of the memory of Anna Emma Poshul-Shelminsky, the grandmother of Sandra Russell, and of Ken Kay, the father of Philip Kay, as well as, of course, of Ron and all those who have their rightful place in memory at this time of year. And we say together, Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayachon u'v'yomachon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, Bagalau vizman kerev vimru, amen. Yehe shemei rabbah mavarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ah v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitada v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei t'kudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Diamiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Israel, ve'al kol b'nei Adam, v'imru, amen. May the Most High Source of perfect peace grant peace to us, to all Israel, and to all humanity, and let us say, amen. Please be seated. I think I hear the dulcet tones of the Cheder outside, who I will invite to come through and onto the bima as a reminder that that was quite a good save, Max, as a reminder that we have multiple generations going on in the community, and just as we think today about the past, we also think about the future. Come on in. Come on up onto the bima. I recommend the steps, but you can climb up the side if you want to. Charlie, would you be a tall person and hold the other end of the tallit? So we're going to give you all a blessing under a tallit. You can squeeze under there. And we say, Yivarachem Adonai v'yishmochem, may God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai yishmochem ve'asitem, may God reach out to you in tenderness. Yisa Adonai panav aleichem ve'asa lachem shalom, may God look towards you in kindness and give you and your families some peace. And let us say, Amen. Thank you. You can take a seat for a moment. We're just going to sing. Wow. We're just going to sing Adon Olam. When I was choosing what the final song for this service should be, I did have one thought that in the 1918 Armistice booklet that Peter read from, there was also a translation of the national anthem into scanning Hebrew that you can sing to the normal tune in Hebrew. I also thought maybe not, but if anyone would like to see what El Shmo HaMelech looks like, El Shmo HaMelech, you can ask to see a copy after the service. But we will in fact sing Adon Olam on page 525. Adon Olam Hashem Allah, B'terem kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa, V'chefzo kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, V'yacharei Kichlot HaKol, Levado Yimloch Nora Adon Olam, V'hu Haya V'hu Hoveh, V'hu Yiyemeti Para Adon Olam, Adon Olam, Hashem Allah, B'terem kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa, V'chefzo kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, V'hu Echad V'yein Sheni, Laham Shelo Lahachmira Adon Olam, Beli Reshit, Beli Tachlit, Belo Ha'oz V'ha'misra Adon Olam, Adon Olam, Hashem Allah, B'terem kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa, V'chefzo kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, V'hu Eli V'chai Goali, V'tzochev li b'yetzara Adon Olam, V'hu Nisi Umanos li, Manat Kosi Meyom Ekra Adon Olam, Adon Olam, Hashem Allah, B'terem kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa, V'chefzo kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, B'ya'ado Avkid Ruchi, B'yetishan V'ya'ira Adon Olam, V'im Ruchi Gaviyati, Adon Ali V'lo Ira Adon Olam, Adon Olam, Hashem Allah, B'terem kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa, V'chefzo kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra. And let's stand up for a final blessing. Adonai oz le'amor yiten, Adonai et amor v'shalom. Eternal God, grant strength to your people. Eternal God, be with your people with peace. And let us say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Before we make Kiddush and before you go anywhere, I'm going to invite our co-chair for some announcements. So please be seated for just a moment.
Thank you, and thank you, Gabriel, and thank you everyone for such a lovely and inspiring service today, particularly a lovely and appropriate to remember Ron at this service that he instigated and has become a tradition in our community and will continue to be a tradition in our community. And as you said, Paula, he'd have been very proud indeed to have seen us here today. Just a few announcements.
Take your mask off for audibility.
Oh, thank you. For that. Just a few upcoming events. Haftarah is today at 6:30. On Thursday at 2 o'clock, Brian Stewart will be leading wherever he is, a discussion group on the Parsha. And then next weekend's an important weekend. It's the Czech Scrolls weekend. Rabbi Tanya will be doing the Friday night service, and the Saturday service will be done by Rabbi Tanya and Rabbi David Maxa. It actually is full for actually being within the shul, but of course, as many people as want to can watch that on Zoom. On Sunday at 11:30, it's this Sunday the 21st, I should say, at 11:30, it's the dedication of the Ohel. And of course, Sunday, the 21st is Mitzvah Day, and there'll be activities going on in the afternoon. And I'll hand back over to Gabriel.
If everyone who wants has got wine, we will say Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pari hagafen. Amen. L'chaim. All right. Does anyone in our cheder know why the bread is under a cover? Yes. It's a very good. That's a good COVID era answer. Is because we're going to touch it. We want to keep it covered. But even before COVID, it was under a cover. Does anyone know why? Does anyone out there, and the boys and girls watching at home, does anyone know why? It's because we bless the wine first, and we don't want the bread to be embarrassed that something else is being blessed before it, and so we cover it up. But now we're fully ready for the bread, and so we will uncover it and say, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.